You are here today because of a coin flip that almost landed wrong. Think about that for a second. Every person you have ever met, every name in your family tree, all of it balanced on something so fragile it barely survived. You were not guaranteed. Humanity was not guaranteed. And the strange part is, almost nobody teaches you what actually happened. Because roughly 70,000 years ago, your entire species nearly disappeared. Not disappeared like a war, not disappeared like a famous extinction you learned about in school. Something quieter, something colder. A collapse so severe that some scientists believe the number of breeding humans left on Earth may have dropped to a few thousand, maybe less. For context, that is fewer people than live in a small town today. One town, holding the entire future of the human race in its hands, without knowing it. What caused it? A supervolcano. Its name was Toba, and it sat on the island of Sumatra, in what is now Indonesia. When it erupted, it did not just destroy the land around it, it changed the sky. Ash spread across the planet. Sunlight dimmed for years. Temperatures dropped. Some researchers call it a volcanic winter, a phrase that sounds almost peaceful until you understand what it actually meant. Crops that did not exist yet still would have failed. Plants died. Animals starved. And the humans who depended on both followed close behind. This idea has a name. It is called the Toba catastrophe theory, first proposed in detail by geologist Stanley Ambrose in the 1990s. Ambrose noticed something unsettling in the genetic record. Human DNA, when you trace it back far enough, shows far less variation than it should. Far less than you would expect from a species that had been around, spreading, and thriving for hundreds of thousands of years. Low genetic diversity is not just a curiosity, it is a fingerprint. It is what happens after a population crashes so hard that almost everyone alive today descends from the same small surviving group. Scientists call this a population bottleneck, and the timing lines up almost too well with the Toba eruption. Picture it. Your ancestors, huddled somewhere, watching a sky that would not clear. No sun for warmth. No easy way to explain what was happening. No science to reassure them that the world was not ending, because as far as their bodies could tell, it was. Hunger became the only conversation that mattered, and most groups did not make it, but some did. Here is where the story gets even stranger, because survival did not happen everywhere the same way. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence comes from the southern coast of Africa, from a site called Pinnacle Point, studied extensively by archaeologist Curtis Marion. While much of the continent may have been drying into hostile, food-scarce terrain, small groups near the coast discovered something the interior could not offer. The ocean. Shellfish. Reliable, low-risk, high-protein food sitting quietly along the tide line, waiting to be gathered instead of hunted. No chasing. No gambling your life on catching something that could just as easily run. Marion's research suggests these coastal populations may have used the sea as a kind of survival insurance policy, something dependable when everything inland became unpredictable. You are, quite possibly, here because someone chose to walk toward the water instead of away from it. Is that comforting or unsettling? Maybe both, because it means survival was not really about strength. It was not about being the fiercest or the fastest. It was about adaptability. About noticing a resource nobody else was using yet. About being willing to change behavior completely when the old way of living stopped working. That single decision, repeated by small groups across generations, is baked into who you are now. Every time you problem solve under pressure, every time you find an unconventional way through a crisis instead of forcing the old method to work. That instinct is old, older than agriculture. Older than written history. It is a survival strategy passed down from people who had no other choice but to be clever. Now, not every scientist agrees on how severe the Toba event actually was. This matters, because good science should always show you its uncertainty, not hide it. Some researchers, including geneticist Lynn Jord and others working with mitochondrial DNA, have pointed out that population bottlenecks in human history could have multiple causes, not just one eruption. Climate shifts, repeated dry periods in Africa, slow grinding pressure rather than one single catastrophic event. The debate is very much alive. Some recent archaeological digs, particularly in regions of Africa that would have been directly affected by Toba's ash, have found tools and evidence of continuous habitation even through the supposed worst years of volcanic winter. That complicates the story. It might mean some groups were far more resilient than the bottleneck theory assumes. But here's the part almost nobody argues about. Something happened. The genetic evidence of a squeeze is there, even if scientists still debate exactly what caused it or how severe it truly was. At some point, your species narrowed down to a small, fragile population, and every single person alive today is a descendant of whoever made it through. Which means every person you pass on the street, every stranger you will never speak to, every name etched onto a war memorial, every baby born tonight. All of them trace back to a group so small it would fit inside a single stadium section. Does that change how you see other people? It should. Because right now, in your daily life, differences feel enormous. Country, language, belief, skin, politics. It is easy to convince yourself that humanity is divided into deeply separate tribes, permanently different from one another. But zoom out 70,000 years, and the picture flips completely. You are not looking at separate tribes. You are looking at cousins. Distant, yes. Spread across an entire planet, yes. But cousins nonetheless, all branching from the same terrified, hungry, resourceful handful of survivors who refuse to disappear quietly. That is not a metaphor. That is genetics. And it explains something else too. Why certain instincts feel universal no matter where you go. The comfort of a fire at night. The instinct to share food with someone in your group. The panic that spikes in your chest during sudden darkness or sudden cold. These are not modern habits. These are inherited memories of a world that once nearly ended, carried forward in behavior long after the memory of Toba itself faded from any human mind. You do not remember the eruption. Nobody does. But your body still carries the response to it. Every time you stockpile food before a storm. Every time a group of strangers pulls together during a disaster instead of falling apart. Every time humans, against every incentive to look out only for themselves, choose cooperation instead. That is not just kindness. That is ancient wiring, activated by circumstances your ancestors would recognize immediately. So the next time the world feels unstable, the next time everything seems uncertain, chaotic, maybe even frightening, remember this. Your species has been here before, not metaphorically, literally, standing at the edge of disappearing completely and finding a way through anyway. Not through brute force, but through adaptability, cooperation, and the willingness to try something new when the old way stopped working. You are not guaranteed to exist, but you do, and that is not luck. That is the ending of the closest call your species ever had, still writing itself, one generation at a time, through you.